have spent 9 years trying to forget this look.
I never did. I ran because I was afraid of loving someone and being wrong.
I am not in grey anymore, Sebastian. I am right here.
The morning Eleanor Voss turned 35, nobody remembered. Not her sister, not her brother-in-law, not the 3 housemaids who had served Ashford Hall for a combined 40 years, not even Cook, who had baked a cake every year of Eleanor's life from age 5 to age 26, until the year Cook decided that a woman without a husband had nothing worth celebrating. Eleanor woke before the sun. She always did. She lay in her narrow bed, narrower than the one she had slept in as a girl, because her brother-in-law, Gerald, had converted the larger guest rooms into a billiards chamber and a smoking room. And she stared at the ceiling and counted the cracks in the plaster. 17. The same as yesterday. The same as last week. The ceiling was the most reliable thing in her life. She rose without ringing for a maid. She had stopped doing that 2 years ago when she noticed that the maids took longer to come when they were called for her. Not because they were lazy, because they had quietly absorbed the lesson that the household had been teaching for years. Eleanor Voss did not matter very much. She was 35, unmarried, and entirely dependent on her younger sister's goodwill. In the language of polite society, she was a spinster. In the language that people used when they thought she could not hear, she was something worse. She dressed herself in grey wool. She always wore grey now, not because she liked it, because she had noticed, somewhere around her 30th birthday, that when she wore color, people looked at her with a specific kind of pity, the kind that said, "How sad. She still tries." And that pity was harder to bear than invisibility. Grey made her invisible. She had decided that invisible was better. She went downstairs. She made herself tea in the kitchen because Cook did not arrive until 7 and Eleanor was awake at 5. She sat at the kitchen table and she drank her tea, and she looked out the small window at the garden that was her only real occupation, the one thing at Ashford Hall that was truly hers. And she breathed. This was her life. She was not bitter about it. That is the important thing to understand. Eleanor Voss was many things: quiet, observant, occasionally sharp-tongued when she forgot to be careful, and possessed of an interior life so rich and complex that it would have startled anyone who assumed from looking at her that there was nothing interesting happening inside her head. But she was not bitter. Bitterness required hope that had curdled. Eleanor had long ago stopped hoping for anything that the world was not already giving her. The world was giving her grey mornings and kitchen tea and a garden that bloomed in April and the knowledge that she was, by every measure her society used, a failure. She had made her peace with it. Or so she believed. Her sister Cecily came down at 9, as she always did, in a cloud of rose perfume and morning irritability. Cecily was 31 and beautiful and married, and therefore, by the logic of their world, a success. She had married Gerald Hartwick 6 years ago, and Gerald was not a kind man, but he was a wealthy one, and that was what mattered. See, Cecily had learned very quickly to be grateful for wealth and to overlook the other things. She poured herself tea without offering to pour for Eleanor, who was sitting right there at the breakfast table. "I had a letter from Lady Pembrook," Cecily said, sitting down and opening her correspondence with the small silver letter knife she kept for that purpose. "She is hosting a gathering next month, a full fortnight." Eleanor said nothing. She was eating toast. "The Duke of Merath will be attending," Cecily said, in the particular tone she used when she was saying something she wanted Eleanor to react to. Eleanor did not react. She finished her piece of toast and reached for another. Eleanor, did you hear me? I heard you. The Duke of Merath, Cecily repeated, enunciating each word as though Eleanor might have missed one of them. He is back from the continent. I know. He has been gone for, 3 years? 4, Eleanor said. She said it before she could stop herself, and then she was annoyed at herself for saying it. Cecily looked at her with the quick, sideways look she used when she thought she had discovered something. You kept count. I read the papers, Cecily. It is not a secret that the Duke has been in Europe. Half of London has followed his movements. Half of London hopes he will marry, Cecily said. He is 41, never wed. They say he is impossible, cold and proud and dreadful at parties. They say a great many things. Eleanor. Cecily put down her letter knife. She looked at her sister with something that was almost, not quite, tenderness. Lady Pembrook's gathering. She asked specifically if you would come. Eleanor went very still. Lady Pembrook asked for me. She did. I thought it odd too, but her letter is quite clear. She says she would like the company of a sensible woman. Cecily's mouth did a small, complicated thing. I suppose that means you. Eleanor looked out the window at her garden. The roses were just beginning. Red ones and white ones, and one stubborn yellow one that had come up wrong, but that she had kept because she liked its stubbornness. A fortnight is a long time to be away from the garden, she said. Eleanor, for heaven's sake, it is a house party. Lady Pembrook is one of the most well-connected women in England. There will be lords, dukes, the Merath himself will be there. Can you not at least— I will think about it, Eleanor said. She already knew she would go. Not because of the lords, not because of the Duke, whose name she had refused to say since the winter she was 26, the winter when everything changed, the winter she had built a wall around so carefully that she sometimes forgot what it contained. She would go because Lady Pembrook had asked for her specifically, and because in 9 years nobody had asked for Eleanor Voss specifically, not for any reason at all. The village of Ashford had opinions about Eleanor. This was not unusual. Small villages have opinions about everyone, but they reserve their most sustained energy for the people who confound them. Eleanor confounded Ashford because she did not behave the way a spinster should. She did not simper or apologize for existing. She walked with her back straight. She spoke to tradesmen and farmers and the vicar's wife with equal directness, not differentiating between them based on their position. She read books that were not romances or household manuals, scientific texts sometimes, and histories, and the political pamphlets that were meant for men. She had been engaged once. Everyone in Ashford knew this, though the specifics had blurred with time into something more like legend than fact. There had been a man. He had been wealthy and handsome. Something had happened. She had ended the engagement, or he had ended it. Accounts varied. And after that, no other man had come, and Eleanor had remained at Ashford Hall in her sister's house, growing her garden and reading her books and wearing grey, and the village had quietly decided that there was something wrong with her. See, some flaw of character that had driven the man away and kept all others at bay. They were not entirely wrong about the flaw. They were entirely wrong about what it was. Eleanor had ended the engagement herself. The man had been Lord Thomas Fairway, son of an earl, handsome in the way that men who know they are handsome become handsome, performatively, like a trained display. He had courted her with great efficiency when she was 24, and she had been young enough then to confuse efficiency with ardor. They had been engaged for 4 months, and then she had met the Duke of Marath. She had not met him the way people in novels meet each other, not across a ballroom with a sudden electric recognition. She had met him at a dinner party at her aunt's house, seated next to him because the seating arrangement had gone wrong at the last moment, and she was the only available woman of appropriate status to fill the gap. He had sat down and looked at her, not the way men usually looked at her, which was briefly and with mild assessment, but with his full attention, the way a person looks at something that has genuinely surprised them. "Miss Voss," he had said, having read her name card. "Are you the Miss Voss who wrote the letter to the Times about the Enclosure Acts?" She had gone completely cold with shock and then completely hot with embarrassment. She had written that letter under her brother's name because women did not write letters to the Times. How he had known it was her, she still did not understand. "I am," she had said, because the shock had burned away her caution. "It was the best argued letter in that entire exchange," he had said, "and I include my own, which I submitted the following week." She had looked at him then, really looked. Sebastian Vane, the Duke of Marath, 32 years old, tall, with dark eyes and a mouth that seemed designed to express disapproval, and yet, in that moment, not disapproving at all. Looking at her as though she were genuinely the most interesting person at the table. They had talked for 3 hours. She could not remember afterward everything they had discussed. She remembered the feeling of it, the sensation of being entirely seen, entirely engaged, entirely present for the first time in her adult life. She remembered that he had argued against her on 2 points, and that she had argued back, and that he had laughed when she did. Not the dismissive laugh of a man who finds a woman's attempt at intelligence charming, but the real laugh of someone who has encountered a worthy opponent. She had gone home that night and ended her engagement to Lord Fairway. Not because she expected anything from the Duke. She was not such a fool as that. She had ended the engagement because sitting beside Sebastian Vane for 3 hours had shown her, with absolute clarity, that what she had with Thomas Fairway was not enough, had never been enough, and that to marry him would be to diminish herself in a way she could not come back from. She had not expected ever to see the Duke again. She had been wrong about that. Over the following year, she had seen him 6 times, 6 times that she had counted in the way she told herself she was not counting. Twice at London events during the season, when Cecily had still been dragging her along in the faint hope of a match. Once at the British Museum, where they had encountered each other in the Egyptian room and spent an hour arguing about whether the removal of antiquities was a form of scholarship or a form of theft. Once at a lecture on natural philosophy at the Royal Institution, where he had appeared out of nowhere, sat beside her and afterward said, "Your response in the question period was the most interesting one," and she had said, "Your response was self-congratulatory," and he had laughed again. Twice more at dinners where the same inexplicable fate had seated them together. So at no point had he courted her. He had not sent flowers or called at the house or behaved in any of the ways that a man behaved when he meant something particular by his attention. He had simply engaged with her, talked to her, looked at her with that full attention look that she had not known before him was something she craved. She had been 26. She had understood perfectly well that a duke did not marry a woman like her. She was gentry, not nobility. She had no fortune and no title, and by that point, no engagement and an already murmuring reputation for being difficult. She had not hoped. She had simply treasured the 6 times, taken them out in private and looked at them, the way you look at something precious you know you cannot keep. And then, in the February of that year, she had made the mistake. She had been at a house party, not unlike the one she was now being invited to, at Lord Cranmer's estate. There had been snow, there had been an evening of parlour games and an excess of good wine, and Eleanor had drunk a glass more than she should have, not because she was a drinker, but because it was cold, and she was tired, and she was lonely in the particular way that a woman becomes lonely when she is surrounded by coupled people who assume she has chosen to be uncoupled. The Duke had been there. He had been sitting apart from the party by a window, and she had gone to that window because it was away from the noise. They had talked. She could not now remember what about. Something about the snow, and then something about a book she was reading, and then something that had made her laugh. Really laugh. See, not her careful social laugh, but the undignified laugh that came up from her chest. And she had looked at him, and he had looked at her, and in that look, in that one terrible, unguarded look, she had let everything she felt show on her face. All of it. The 6 times she had counted, the letter to the Times, the way she had ended her engagement because no other man had ever looked at her the way he did, the longing she had been so carefully managing for a year, all of it for one moment, entirely visible. He had gone very still. She had looked away immediately. She had made some excuse, she could not remember what, and left the window and gone to bed and not come down again until morning. He had left Cranmer's estate that night. She had not seen him again, not once in 9 years. The following season she heard he had gone to Europe. The year after that he was in Italy, then France, then Austria. The papers tracked him with mild interest, the way papers track interesting bachelors. He had not come home. She had never let herself wonder whether it was because of her. That way lay a kind of vanity that she could not afford, and a kind of hope that was more dangerous still. She wore grey. She grew her garden. She turned 27, 28, 29, 30. 31, 32, 33. The village decided there was something wrong with her. She let them think so. It was easier than the truth. The truth was too large and too old to do anything with now. And yet, here was Lady Pembrook's letter. Here was Cecily's voice across the breakfast table. Here was the name that Eleanor had not let herself say for 9 years. She now said aloud in the comfortable dining room of Ashford Hall as casually as a weather report. The Duke of Marath will be attending. Eleanor reached for her 3rd piece of toast. She was going to that house party. She was going to be sensible about it. Pembrook Manor was the kind of house that existed to impress. It had been built by Lady Pembrook's late husband 3 decades ago in the fullest expression of the fashion of that time, which meant it was enormous and slightly excessive and entirely comfortable. The grounds stretched for miles. The corridors were wide enough to drive a carriage through. The guest rooms each had fires lit before the guests arrived, and windows that looked out over either the lake or the topiary garden, or, if you were in the East Wing, both. Eleanor was in the East Wing. She knew this was Lady Pembrook's doing. Lady Pembrook herself was 73, and looked 60 and behaved 55, and was widely regarded as the most formidable woman in 3 counties. She had been a great beauty in her youth. People still mentioned it. Oh, as though it explained her. But beauty had never been her primary quality. Her primary quality was acuity. She saw things. She understood things. She had been widowed at 40 and had devoted the following 33 years to the twin pleasures of travel and orchestrating the lives of people she found interesting, always with a light enough hand that they rarely noticed they were being orchestrated. Eleanor had met her 4 years ago at the funeral of a mutual acquaintance, and Lady Pembrook had taken one look at her and said, "You are too interesting for that dress," which was probably the most accurate thing anyone had said to Eleanor in a decade. They had corresponded since then. Nothing dramatic, occasional letters about books, about the garden, a once-in-extended exchange about a particular political pamphlet that they had both read and found insufficiently argued. Eleanor valued the correspondence more than she would have admitted, because Lady Pembrook treated her, in letters, the way very few people treated her in person, as a full human being with something worth saying. She had not told Lady Pembrook about the Duke. There was nothing to tell that did not make her sound either delusional or pathetic. A 6 times acquaintance, a moment at a window, 9 years of nothing. That was not a story. That was just a series of events that a woman with too much interior life had given too much meaning. She arrived at Pembrook Manor on a Tuesday in late May, in a hired carriage because Cecily and Gerald would not be coming until Thursday. She stepped out into the afternoon sun and looked up at the house and took a breath. She was wearing blue, not grey. She had decided, packing, that she was 35 years old, and she had never done anything to deserve the grey, and if she was going to be invisible, she would be invisible in whatever colour she liked. Lady Pembrook met her in the entrance hall, which was not where Lady Pembrook met most guests. That was the job of her housekeeper. But Lady Pembrook did things her own way. "Eleanor," she said, taking her hands, "you look rather well." "I look startled," Eleanor said. "The drive was long." Lady Pembrook laughed. It was one of the things Eleanor liked about her. She laughed at things that were actually funny, and not at things that merely appeared to be funny. "Come, have tea. The others won't begin arriving until tomorrow, and we have this evening entirely to ourselves." They had tea in the yellow sitting room, which was small and warm, and entirely unlike the rest of the house. Lady Pembrook had done something comfortable with it, books stacked on every surface, a cat sleeping on the best chair, the kind of informal arrangement that said this room was for actual living. "Tell me about the garden," Lady Pembrook said, and Eleanor told her because the garden was easy and real, and she needed something easy and real while she arranged her thoughts. They were halfway through the second pot of tea when Lady Pembrook said, in the same comfortable tone she had used to ask about the garden, "Sebastian is arriving on Thursday." Eleanor's cup did not rattle. She was quite proud of that. "Meredith," she said, as though clarifying. "Yes. We have been friends for many years, he and I, since he was very young and dreadfully serious. I have watched him go to Europe and be dreadfully serious there, and now I have made him come home and attend this party, and I intend to make sure the visit is worthwhile." "That sounds very like you," Eleanor said. Lady Pembrook looked at her with those sharp, seeing eyes. "He has never married." "I am aware." "He is 41. I am aware of that also." "He is coming," Lady Pembrook said carefully, "in part because I told him you would be here." The room went very quiet, or perhaps the room stayed exactly the same, and it was only Eleanor's internal world that went quiet. everything going still in the way it does when you have just heard something that changes the shape of the air. "That was presumptuous of you," Eleanor said. Her voice was entirely steady. She had always been very good at steady. "Yes, I am old enough to be presumptuous. It is one of the privileges." Lady Pembrook set down her cup. "Eleanor, I am not going to pretend that I know everything about what happened between you. I don't. But I know Sebastian, and I know you. And I know that he has been in Europe for 9 years, and I know that you have been in Ashford for 9 years, and I know that 9 years is a long time for two people to be separately miserable when they might, instead, talk to each other. I am not miserable. You are wearing blue," Lady Pembrook said. "You are wearing blue for the first time in how long?" Eleanor looked down at her dress. "That is not evidence of anything," she said. "No," Lady Pembrook agreed pleasantly. "Shh, it is not. Have another cup of tea." He arrived on Thursday, 2 hours before Cecily and Gerald. Eleanor was in the garden. Of course she was in the garden. She had found Lady Pembrook's kitchen garden on Wednesday morning and spent 2 happy hours doing unauthorized but necessary deadheading when she heard the carriages on the gravel. She did not go inside. She stayed among the lavender and the badly pruned rosemary and told herself she was not hiding. She was gardening. Those were different things. She heard voices, one of them low and unhurried, with the quality of a voice that is used to not being interrupted. She had not forgotten his voice. In 9 years, she had not managed to forget his voice. She went inside through the kitchen door, because the kitchen door was furthest from the front of the house, and she went upstairs to her room and sat on the edge of her bed, and she put her hands in her lap and looked at them. She was 35 years old. She was, according to everyone who had a view on the matter, well past the point of romance. She was a spinster who lived in her sister's house, and grew things in a garden, and wore grey as a kind of armor against a world that had decided she was already finished. But she was also the woman who had ended an engagement because 3 hours of conversation had shown her what the rest could be. Who had spent 9 years building a life that was smaller than she deserved because she had, for one unguarded moment, let the truth of herself be entirely visible, and had been terrified by what she had seen looking back. Not coldness, not indifference. The same thing she was feeling. She was almost certain. She had always been almost certain, and that almost was what she could not get past. That gap between almost and entirely, between probability and proof, between what she had seen in his face in the moment before she looked away and what it had actually meant. She could be wrong. She had been wrong before. She had misjudged Thomas Fairway entirely, in the opposite direction. She was not infallible, but she was going downstairs. She was going downstairs for dinner, and she was wearing the blue dress, and she was going to look at him with her eyes open, and she was going to find out. He was already in the drawing room when she came down. He was standing by the fireplace with a glass of wine, talking to Lord Ashbury, who was one of the other guests and who had the kind of loud or carrying voice that filled rooms without effort. Eleanor came through the door and paused because she needed a moment, just one, before she was seen. He was older. Of course he was. 9 years older, 41 now, and it showed in the way that time shows on men when they have spent those years doing something, not just passing through them. There were lines at the corners of his eyes. His dark hair had silver at the temples. He held himself the same way, that contained, economical stillness that she had always associated with him, the quality of a person who is entirely comfortable taking up exactly the space they occupy and no more. He was still the most compelling person in any room he entered. That had not changed. She moved into the room. Lady Pembrook was across it, speaking to two women Eleanor had not yet met. Other guests were arranged in the comfortable clusters of people who have been given enough wine to begin relaxing. The fire was lit despite the May evening because Lady Pembrook ran cold and considered the comfort of her own bones paramount. Eleanor took a glass of wine from a passing footman. She spoke to the two women she hadn't met, a Mrs. Calloway and her daughter, visiting from Yorkshire. She admired the daughter's hair. She listened to Mrs. Calloway's account of the journey from York. She was entirely present in the conversation, because that was what you did. You were present in the conversation you were having, and you did not let your attention slide across the room to the fireplace where... Miss Voss. His voice. Right behind her. She turned. He was closer than she had expected. People who move quietly do that. They arrive at distances that feel surprising. He was perhaps 3 feet away, and he was looking at her with those dark eyes and the expression that she had spent 9 years almost remembering and never quite getting right. This was right. This was the expression, full attention, complete and unhurried, as though the room and all its other occupants had temporarily ceased to matter. "Your Grace," she said. There was a pause. Not long. A beat, maybe 2. "You are wearing blue," he said. She had not expected that. Of all the first things he might have said, she had not expected that. "I am," she said. "It suits you considerably better than grey." Mrs. Calloway and her daughter had gone very quiet in the particular way of people who have realized they are witnessing something that does not concern them. "You saw me in grey," Eleanor said, before she could stop herself. "When?" "Last August. I came through Ashford on the way to my estate in—" He stopped. The expression shifted, barely, but she caught it. Something that was not quite comfortable. "I saw you in the village. You did not see me." He had come through Ashford. He had seen her. He had not stopped. "Last August," she said. "Yes." "You have been back in England since last August." "Since last July," he said. She looked at him. He looked at her. In the fire-lit drawing-room of Pembrook Manor, with Mrs. Calloway and her daughter trying to be invisible 2 feet away, something passed between them that was entirely too large for the room. "I think," Eleanor said with great care, "that we may need to have a conversation." "I think," he said, "that we are approximately 9 years overdue for one." They did not have the conversation that night. They had dinner, all 15 guests seated at Lady Pembrook's long table, with Eleanor at one end and the Duke somewhere in the middle, and a great deal of excellent food and conversation that required everyone to be charming and interested in people they barely knew. Eleanor was charming. She was almost always charming when she needed to be, in the way of people who have spent years being overlooked and have learned that charm, deployed strategically, is the only real currency a woman without money or status possesses. The Duke was not charming. He was, as Cecily had said, dreadful at parties. Or rather, he did not try to be good at them, which was almost worse. He said what he thought. He disagreed with Lord Ashbury about something to do with land reform, and did not soften the disagreement. He was not rude. Eleanor watched for that, and he was not. But he was entirely uninterested in the performance of sociability that everyone else was engaged in. She found this, as she always had, deeply attractive in a way she could not quite justify. Cecily arrived at 9 with Gerald, flushed from the journey and immediately delighted by the grandeur of the house. She embraced Eleanor with unusual warmth. Cecily always became warmer when there were people watching, and then swept into the drawing room where the post-dinner company had gathered and immediately located the Duke. "He is exactly as described," she murmured to Eleanor, appearing at her elbow with the speed of a woman who has taken the lay of the land in under 3 minutes. "Cold, intense, and looking at you." "He is not looking at me," Eleanor said. "He has looked at you 4 times in the last 2 minutes." I counted. "You have been in the room for 2 minutes." "Eleanor, I am your sister. I know how you look when you are pretending not to look at someone. You have that look right now." Cecily's voice was doing something it rarely did. It was being gentle. "What is this? Do you know him?" "We met a long time ago." "How long ago?" 9 years. Cecily stared at her. Eleanor felt the stare but did not meet it. "I am going to bed," Eleanor said. "I am tired from the journey." "You arrived 2 days ago." "I am tired from being at a party." She went upstairs. She lay in her very comfortable East Wing bed and looked at the ceiling. 4 cracks, fewer than at home. And she breathed very carefully, and did not think about the fact that he had come through Ashford last August, and had seen her in the village, and had not stopped. Why had he not stopped? She turned the question over. She was very good at logic, at following a thread of reasoning through to its conclusion without flinching. He had been in England since July. He had come through Ashford in August. He had seen her. He had not approached. This could mean he had looked and felt nothing and moved on. This could mean he had looked and felt something and been afraid of it. This could mean something else entirely, something she had not thought of, some third possibility she was not in possession of. She needed more information. She needed the conversation. She was not going to sleep. She went to the garden at midnight, not to find him. She went because she could not sleep, and because gardens at midnight are one of the most reliably peaceful places in the world, the darkness making familiar shapes, unfamiliar and quiet, and the smell of things growing quite unlike the smell of anything else. She took a shawl and a candle in a glass lantern and went out the East Wing garden door and into Lady Pembrook's formal garden, which was all geometric hedges and gravel paths and roses that were just beginning to open. She was sitting on a stone bench beside a particularly fine climbing rose when she heard footsteps on the gravel. She knew before she looked. He came around the bend of the hedge path and stopped when he saw her. He was in his shirt sleeves, no jacket, no cravat, the kind of undress that was completely improper for mixed company, and that she had never, in all her careful accounting of their encounters, seen him in before. He looked younger like this, more like a person and less like a position. "Miss Voss," he said. "Your Grace." She looked at her candle. "I should go in." "Probably," he said. "I should as well." Neither of them moved. He came and sat on the other end of the bench, a decorous distance, and looked out at the dark garden. For a while neither of them said anything. The rose above them moved in a small breeze. Somewhere across the grounds an owl made its 3-note inquiry. "Why did you not stop?" Eleanor said. "In Ashford." "Yes." He was quiet for long enough that she thought he might not answer. Then, "I have asked myself that question a considerable number of times." And the most honest answer I have," he said, "is that I was afraid." She looked at him. He was looking at his hands. "You," she said carefully, "were afraid. I know how that sounds. It sounds... She stopped. It sounded impossible, and also it sounded like the most believable thing anyone had said to her in years. What were you afraid of? He turned then and looked at her, and the lantern light was doing something to the planes of his face that made the expression there very clear and entirely unguarded. That I would stop, he said, and you would look at me the way I deserve to be looked at, which is how? With contempt, or worse, with indifference. She absorbed this. And why would you have deserved contempt? The question sat between them. He was very still. Cranmer's, he said. The February, 9 years ago. I know what you mean. You looked at me. He said it very quietly, not accusatory, more like something he had been carrying a long time and had not put down. At the window. You looked at me and I... He stopped, started again. I knew in that moment, I was quite certain, and I left. Eleanor's hands were very still in her lap. You left. I left the party that night. I went to London. I told myself... He made a small, uncharacteristic gesture, something almost helpless. I told myself a great many things, that I was imagining it, that a woman of your intelligence and of your quality could not seriously feel. He stopped again. I told myself I had misread the moment. That to act on what I believed I had seen would be to impose myself on you in a way you had not invited. Eleanor was looking at him. And then, she said slowly, you left England. Yes. For 4 years. Yes. And then when you came back, she said, and her voice was doing something she was trying to stop it from doing. And you came through Ashford, and you saw me. And you did not stop because you were afraid. Yes. Of what I would think of you. Of what you would rightfully think of me, he said. Eleanor, I have behaved in a way that I am not proud of. I saw something true and I ran from it, and I kept running, and by the time I came back you had been... You have spent 9 years in that house in grey dresses and... I am not in grey now, she said. He looked at her. Something shifted. No, he said. You are not. I chose the blue tonight, she said, and she heard how revealing that was as she said it, but she was tired of being careful. She had been careful for 9 years. She was 35 years old, and she had decided on the way to the garden that whatever happened in this conversation she was going to be, for once, entirely honest. I chose it because I was tired of being invisible, because I had let the world make me invisible, and I had cooperated with it, and I decided, before I knew you would be here, before I knew you would notice. She paused. That is not true. I knew you would be here. I chose the blue partly because you would be here. That is a more honest sentence. He was very still. I have loved you, he said, for 9 years. The owl made its sound again. The rose moved. Eleanor Voss, who had not cried since the winter she was 26, did not cry now. She was not going to cry. But her eyes were doing something, and her hands, and the whole careful architecture of composed indifference she had been building for 9 years, was doing something it had not done before. It was falling down. You are going to have to, she said, and her voice was very careful. Say that again, because I think I may have misheard you. You heard me perfectly, he said. Sebastian. His name. She had not said it in 9 years, had not let herself, and now it was out, and it was the right word, the most accurate word, and she could not take it back and did not want to. Eleanor, he said. Like an answer, she reached across the decorous distance of the bench and put her hand over his. His hand turned over and held hers, not tentatively, not exploringly, with the certainty of a man who has been waiting 9 years to do exactly this one thing and is not going to do it by halves. "I want you to understand something," she said. "I am 35 years old. I am a spinster by every measure this society uses. I have no money of my own, and I live in my sister's house, and I grow a garden. If you mean what you said, you need to mean it, in full knowledge of all of that, not in spite of it, but including it, because I cannot be." "Eleanor." His thumb moved across her knuckles. One small motion. "I know who you are. I have known who you are since a dinner party where you told me my letter to the Times was self-congratulatory, and you were entirely correct." She almost laughed. The almost laugh came out as something that was not quite crying and not quite laughing and was, she thought, probably the most undignified sound she had ever made in front of another person. He made no comment on the sound. He just held her hand. They stayed in the garden for a long time. The house party saw, of course. House parties always see. That is their function, to put a collection of people into close proximity and then watch what develops, which is not quite their stated function, but is very much their actual one. By Friday morning, Mrs. Calloway had noted to her daughter that the Duke had been seen in the garden after midnight, and that Miss Voss had also been seen, not in her room after midnight, and that these two facts occurring on the same night might or might not be related, but were certainly worth remarking upon. By Friday afternoon, Lord Ashbury had observed that the Duke had apparently been positioned near Miss Voss at both breakfast and the midday garden walk in a manner that did not look accidental, and had shared this observation with 2 other guests, who had each shared it with 2 more. By Friday dinner, Lady Pembrook, who had known everything since Wednesday, maintained an expression of complete innocence and poured wine for everyone. Cecily cornered Eleanor in the upstairs corridor before dinner. "Tell me everything," she said. "There is nothing to tell. You have been pink all day. It is warm. Eleanor Voss, it is May, and you have been in the garden all morning. You do not get pink from the garden. You get dirt on your hands from the garden, and you do not care about it." Cecily studied her. "He spoke to you last night." Eleanor said nothing. "Oh," Cecily said. She said it quietly, which was unusual. "Oh, Eleanor, don't. I am not going to say anything bad. I want to say—" Cecily stopped. She was, Eleanor realized, genuinely uncertain what she wanted to say, which was rare for Cecily, who was usually in full command of her own opinions. "I want to say that you deserve something good. You have always deserved something good, and we have all been. We have not been." She stopped again. "Gerald and I have not been as kind as we should have been. I know that." Eleanor looked at her sister. Cecily was 31 and beautiful, and had chosen a difficult life with good grace. And it had cost her something, Eleanor could see now, in the way that it always costs you something when you choose safety over joy. "Cecily," she said gently. "If he makes you happy," Cecily said, "then I am glad, even if—" she gestured vaguely. "Even if it is strange and sudden and the whole county gossips about it." "Nothing has happened," Eleanor said. "We talked. We held hands in the garden like children." Cecily blinked. "That is not nothing," she said. "For you, Eleanor, that is not nothing at all." Gerald had opinions. Gerald always had opinions, and they were always loudest in the situations where they were least welcome. He found Eleanor on Saturday morning in the library, where she was reading and had been entirely happy reading, and he sat down across from her with the expression he used when he was about to be protective of something that was actually his own interests, wearing the costume of someone else's welfare. "This business with Merath," he said. Eleanor put a finger in her book. "Yes. You understand that it will come to nothing. I understand no such thing. A duke," Gerald said, "does not marry a woman of your situation." "My situation," Eleanor said. "I mean no offense by it. I am being practical, which is more than most people are being on your behalf. You are 35. You have no dowry. You have a reputation for frankness, shall we say. Merath may find you diverting. He may pay you attention. He will not offer marriage. And when he moves on, you will be in a position worse than before. People will say, "Gerald," Eleanor said. Her voice was very quiet and very even. "What people say about me could not, at this point, be appreciably worse than what they already say. And I have survived what they already say for 9 years." She opened her book. "Thank you for your practical concern. I will not be requiring it." Gerald went rather red. He left. Eleanor sat with her book for a while without reading it. She was not a fool. She knew perfectly well that Gerald was not entirely wrong, that the world would have a great deal to say about a Duke of Merath marrying a spinster of 35 with no money and a history of difficult opinions. She knew that Sebastian would face pressure, that his family, she did not know his family well, but she knew that he had a mother who had opinions about suitable wives, would have views. She knew all of this. She had also sat in a midnight garden and held his hand and heard him say words that she was not going to unhear, and she had decided finally and irrevocably that she was not going to manage the expectations of a world that had never managed anything on her behalf. If it came to nothing, it came to nothing. She had survived nothing before. But she was not going to let the fear of nothing stop her from reaching for something. He found her in the kitchen garden on Saturday afternoon. She was not hiding this time. She was genuinely working. She had found a patch of mint that had taken over half a bed and was engaged in the deeply satisfying activity of getting it under control. She heard his footsteps and did not stop what she was doing. He came and sat on the low stone wall nearby and watched her. "I spoke to Lady Pembrook this morning," he said. "About what?" "About you, about the last 9 years." He was quiet while she pulled up another runner of mint. "She was not gentle with me." "Lady Pembrook is never gentle with anyone she respects," Eleanor said. "It would be condescending. She told me that I owe you a proper account of myself." Eleanor sat back on her heels and looked up at him. "She is right." He nodded. He looked at his hands for a moment. Then, "I want to be honest with you about all of it. Not because it reflects well on me. Because you have been honest with me and I owe you the same in return. Then tell me." "When I left England," he said, "I told myself it was because I was not certain of what I had seen at Cranmer's, that I might have been wrong, that a woman like you could not seriously—" He stopped. But that was not the real reason. The real reason was that I was certain. I was very certain. And I was afraid of it. Afraid of loving someone? Afraid of loving someone and being wrong about being loved in return. He said it plainly, without drama, in the tone of a man who has had 9 years to understand his own cowardice and does not intend to dress it up. I have not had a great deal of experience of being loved well. My mother is not a warm woman. My father, before he died, was not a warm man. The marriages I observed growing up were arrangements. Arrangements with perhaps affection in them, but not what I saw in your face at that window. She was very still, listening. I looked at you, he said, and I saw something that I had not expected and did not know what to do with. And instead of doing anything about it, I ran. For 9 years. For 9 years. He looked at her directly. I am not asking you to forgive that without reservation. I am not asking for anything you are not willing to give, but I want you to know that it was not indifference. It was never indifference. You are the least indifference-inspiring person I have ever known. Eleanor looked at him for a long moment. Then she held out the bunch of mint she was holding. Make yourself useful, she said. There is more of this in the far bed. Pull the runners, the long stems with roots at the nodes. He looked at the mint. He looked at her. Something happened in his face that was not quite a smile, but was in the territory of one. He took off his jacket. He came off the wall. He knelt in the bed beside her and began, inexpertly, to pull mint runners. They worked in silence for 20 minutes. His technique improved. By the end, he was doing it quite well. I should like to court you properly, he said as they were clearing the last of the runners. If you will permit it. We are 35 and 41, Eleanor said. The word courting makes us sound like we are 20. What word would you prefer? She sat back and looked at the cleared bed with satisfaction. I would prefer, she said, that you simply continue as you have been. Talk to me. Be honest with me. Let me be honest with you. See where we are at the end of the fortnight. And if at the end of the fortnight I want considerably more than that, then, Eleanor said, we will discuss it at the end of the fortnight. It rained on Monday. The kind of rain that makes everyone in an English country house feel simultaneously cozy and slightly trapped, which leads to card games and reading and, in the case of house parties, conversation that goes deeper than it might in better weather. Eleanor spent the morning in the library with Sebastian. She had been calling him Sebastian in her head since Friday, and was gradually becoming able to say it aloud with something approaching composure. Going through Lady Pembrook's impressive collection of natural philosophy texts and arguing about Lamarck. Evolution through use and disuse is not compatible with what we actually observe, Eleanor said. The evidence is insufficient either way, he said. The evidence is not insufficient. It is simply not organized into a framework yet. Someone will organize it. Give it another 20 years. You are very confident about the 20 years. I have read everything available. If you want to challenge my conclusion, you need to read it too. She handed him a volume. Start with this one. He took it. He looked at the cover. This is in German. Yes. I do not read German. Then you have a project, Eleanor said, and turned back to her own book. He learned that rainy Monday 3 things about Eleanor Voss that he had not known and that each surprised him in a different way. The first was that she read German well enough to summarize entire texts for him when she saw he was genuinely interested. The second was that she laughed differently when she was comfortable. Not the careful, small laugh of public occasions, but something real and slightly unexpected that came out of her when he said something that surprised her. The third was that she had opinions about almost everything, and that these opinions were almost always more considered than his own, and that disagreeing with her was genuinely the most stimulating intellectual activity he had engaged in years. He had known these things in outline. The Monday in the library gave them substance. Cecily came in at noon and saw them and turned around and left again without saying anything. Gerald came in at 2 and did not leave, and spent 20 minutes in a conversation that was not quite hostile, but in which his coolness towards Sebastian was very apparent. Sebastian was impeccably polite. He was always impeccably polite to people he did not like. It was a skill. After Gerald left, Eleanor looked at him. "He thinks you are leading me astray." He may not be entirely wrong. He absolutely is. I am leading myself. I am an adult woman making considered choices, and if he cannot see that— She stopped. "I am sorry. He is my brother-in-law. You do not need to defend him to me." "I know." She looked out at the rain. "I have spent 9 years being managed by Gerald's opinions about my life. The extent to which I am tired of it surprises even me." "Then stop," Sebastian said simply. She looked at him. "Stop," he said again. "You have a choice in this. I understand that it has not always felt that way, but you are not without options, Eleanor." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "What options, precisely, do you think I have?" It was a real question. She wanted to know what he saw when he looked at her situation, because she had been inside it for so long that she could not always see its edges clearly. "You could leave Ashford," he said. "Find employment that uses your mind. Governess if you must, though that would be an insane waste of your capabilities. Companion to someone who can offer you a real position. Or," he stopped. "Or," she said. "Or you could have what you actually deserve," he said, "which is a household of your own, and a garden of your own, and someone to argue with properly for the rest of your life." She looked at him steadily. "Is that an oblique proposal?" "It is an oblique indication," he said, "of an intention. The proposal, if there is one, will not be oblique. I want to be entirely clear about that." "Well," she said, "good." They went back to their books. The letter arrived on Tuesday morning. It came from London, or addressed to the Duke, and the footman brought it on a silver tray with the mild importance that letters to dukes receive. Eleanor was not present when he read it. She was having breakfast with Lady Pembrook and Mrs. Calloway and her daughter, and she did not notice his absence from the breakfast table because she had not yet quite allowed herself to notice his absences as a category. She noticed when he did not appear for the morning walk, and when she saw Lady Pembrook's face change very slightly when a footman brought her a note. "What has happened?" Eleanor asked when they were briefly alone. Lady Pembrook looked at her with those sharp eyes, and the sharpness was not directed at Eleanor, but at something behind Eleanor, at a situation. "Sebastian has received a letter from his mother." "About?" "About the fact that someone in this house has written to the Duchess of Meath to inform her that her son has been spending considerable time in the company of an unmarried woman of 35 with no money and no prospects." Lady Pembrook's voice was very dry. "I intend to find out who wrote the letter. I have my suspicions." Eleanor went very still. "What does the letter say?" "I have not read it, but I know his mother and I know what she will say. The Duchess has been attempting to arrange a marriage for Sebastian for 20 years. She does not know you. She will see a spinster of 35. "I know what she will see," Eleanor said. She went to the garden. The rain from Monday had left everything bright and washed, and the roses that had been budding were opening now, and it was a beautiful morning, and she was standing in the middle of it, feeling the specific cold that comes when something you have been afraid of moves from possibility to probability. Gerald had written the letter. She was nearly certain of it. Gerald, who had come to her in the library and seen them together, and had been coolly hostile ever since. Gerald, who had friends in London, and would know how to reach the Duchess of Merath, and who would think he was doing Eleanor a kindness by stopping something before she was hurt by it, but who was actually, as always, protecting his own concern about what Eleanor's behavior reflected on his household. She was not going to cry about this. She was not going to make any decisions until she had spoken to Sebastian. She waited. An hour, maybe more, among the roses. And then she heard him coming. He looked, when she turned to see him, like a man who has just had an argument with something large and intractable. Not with her. She registered that immediately. The set of his face was not the face of someone coming to deliver bad news with the intention of retreating from it. It was the face of someone who has made a decision and is bringing it to be shared. "She wants me to come to London," he said. I assumed she would. "She has a list." Something crossed his face. "My mother often has lists. This one contains 3 names of women she considers appropriate. One of them is 19. How efficient of her." I wrote back, he said. Eleanor waited. I told her that I had no intention of coming to London, that I was here for the remainder of the fortnight, that I would see her when I returned to town and that we would have a conversation at that time, but that the conversation would not go the way she was hoping. He looked at Eleanor steadily. I also told her that I had spent 9 years behaving stupidly, and I was not inclined to extend that run. "You said that in a letter to your mother." "Approximately," he said, in slightly more formal language. She looked at him. The morning light was doing the same thing to him that it did to everything, making it clear, the shadows and the true shapes both visible. He was looking at her with that full attention expression, and this time she let herself look back with everything, not measuring or managing, just looking. "Sebastian," she said, "who wrote to your mother?" A pause. "I have my suspicions." "So do I." "Gerald Hartwick," they said. Simultaneously, there was a beat. "He thought he was protecting me," Eleanor said. "He is wrong about almost everything, but he does think he is protecting me." "I know." Sebastian's jaw was doing something complicated. "I will not. He is your family. I will not make this more difficult for you." "He already made it more difficult. This..." She gestured at the letter, at the absence of the letter, at the whole situation. "This is not new, Sebastian. My whole life has been people making my choices for me on the grounds that they know better. Gerald, Cecily sometimes, the village, this society." She said it quietly, not with anger, but with a kind of tired clarity. "I am done allowing it." "Then what do you want?" he asked. "I want what you said yesterday," she said. "In the library. A household of my own and a garden, and someone to argue with properly." She paused. "Is the offer still standing after a letter from your mother?" "The offer," he said, "was never withdrawn. My mother's list has nothing to do with the offer. She will be very unhappy. She has been unhappy with me for a considerable portion of my adult life. She will manage." He came closer. "Eleanor, I want to be clear. I am not doing this in spite of convention or in defiance of anything. I am doing it because you are the person I have wanted since I was 32, and I have wasted 9 years, and I am not wasting any more. That is a very clear speech. I thought it should be. She held out her hand. He took it. Same as the garden bench, same certainty, the grip of someone not holding tentatively but actually holding. Then, Eleanor said, I suppose I had better meet your mother. He looked at her. That will be, he said, either very entertaining or very difficult. Both, she said, almost certainly both. They left the house party a day early. Not because they were fleeing. Eleanor did not flee things. She had learned that running from a situation never put enough distance between you and it. But because Sebastian, having made his decision, was not a man who moved at a leisurely pace once he had determined the direction. Lady Pembrook said goodbye to them in the entrance hall with an expression that was mostly suppressed satisfaction and a little genuine emotion. I have been waiting a long time for this, she said to both of them. You knew, Sebastian said. I have known since 1822, she said. When I saw you both at the Ashbury ball and you spent the entire evening in separate corners, stealing looks at each other and being terribly dignified about it. She squeezed Eleanor's hands. Write to me. Every week, Eleanor promised. Cecily said goodbye more warmly than Eleanor expected. She held her for a moment at the carriage door and said quietly in Eleanor's ear, I am sorry about Gerald. He does not understand people the way you do. He never has. Neither do I always, Eleanor said, but I am trying. Gerald said nothing. He stood at a slight distance with his chin elevated and his expression closed. Eleanor looked at him and felt, unexpectedly, more compassion than resentment. Gerald was a man shaped by a world that rewarded a particular kind of certainty, and he had achieved that certainty by never questioning it, and the cost of that was that he could not see her clearly. He never had been able to. Gerald, she said as she passed him, I know you meant well. He said nothing. But something shifted in his face, something that was not quite acknowledgement, but was in that direction. The Duchess of Marath received them in her London house at 4 o'clock on a Thursday, in the second largest drawing room, which was a choice that said something. Not the grandest room, which would have been a statement of power, but not the small informal one either. A medium room, a room for managing situations. She was 63 years old and looked like Sebastian would look in 20 years if Sebastian had higher cheekbones and a great deal more practice at disapproval. She was dressed impeccably and sat with the posture of someone who had never, in 6 decades, allowed her spine to touch the back of a chair. She looked at Eleanor with the comprehensive assessment of a woman who has been evaluating people for 40 years and has gotten very good at it. Eleanor looked back with the assessment of a woman who has spent 35 years being evaluated and has also gotten very good at it. Miss Voss, said the Duchess. Your Grace, said Eleanor. There was a moment. Sebastian, beside Eleanor, said nothing. Eleanor had told him in the carriage that this was her conversation to have, not his, and he had, after a pause that told her the instruction went against every instinct he had, agreed. I understand, said the Duchess, that you have been acquainted with my son for some years. We first met 9 years ago, Eleanor said. We have been better acquainted in the last 2 weeks. 9 years, the Duchess repeated. Oh, her tone made it a question without asking one. The acquaintance was interrupted, Eleanor said, by circumstance and I think by a certain amount of mutual cowardice. Something shifted in the Duchess's expression. It was very small, but Eleanor caught it. "My son has never been a coward," the Duchess said. "He has, on this particular subject, been extraordinarily cowardly," Eleanor said pleasantly. "I say this with full acknowledgement that I was equally at fault. We have both been cautious in ways that did not serve us. We are attempting to correct that now." "You are," said the Duchess, 35 years old. "I am. You have no fortune. I have none. Your family is gentry, not nobility." "That is correct. And you have," the Duchess paused, "a reputation for being opinionated." "I have a reputation," Eleanor said, "for saying what I think. I understand that this has been received as an inconvenience by many people. I have given some thought over the years to whether I should change this, and I have concluded that the cost of changing it is higher than the cost of the reputation." She looked at the Duchess steadily. "I wanted to tell you that directly, rather than have you discover it later and feel that you had been misled." The silence in the room was a particular kind, not hostile, not comfortable, attentive. "You are telling me," said the Duchess slowly, "that you will not be an easy daughter-in-law." "I am telling you that I will be an honest one," Eleanor said. "I will not scheme. I will not pretend to opinions I do not have. I will not manage you, and I would ask in return not to be managed. I am aware that what I am offering is not conventional. What Sebastian and I are, what this is not conventional. I cannot make it conventional, and I would not want to because we are not 20, and this is not a first-season romance. It is something that has taken 9 years and a great deal of unnecessary suffering to arrive at, and it is very real, and I am not going to diminish it by pretending to be something I am not for anyone's comfort, including yours." The Duchess looked at her for a very long moment. "Sebastian," she said, not looking at him. "Does she speak this way to you?" "Always," Sebastian said. "And you find it indispensable," Sebastian said. Another silence. The Duchess turned back to Eleanor. Her expression had done something that Eleanor could not quite read. Not warmth, not yet, but something that was perhaps the precondition for warmth, a kind of acknowledgement. "I have," said the Duchess, "been trying to find my son a wife for 20 years. He has refused every candidate I have proposed. I had begun to believe he was deliberately thwarting me." "He was not thwarting you," Eleanor said. "He was waiting. For you? For something that was worth not running from." The Duchess was quiet for a long moment. Then, with the precise movement of someone who has decided something, "I will require time," she said, "to adjust my expectations." "That is entirely reasonable," Eleanor said. "I will also require," she paused, "I will require that you take tea with me, regularly, so that I may form my own assessment of you without the filter of what anyone else has told me." "I would like that," Eleanor said, and she found, saying it, that it was true. Sebastian beside her made a very small sound. She did not look at him, but she suspected that if she had, she would have seen something in his face that she had not seen there before. Something relieved, something grateful, something that looked like a man who had been carrying a weight for a very long time and had just been offered for the first time some help with it. They married in October, 6 months after the house party. This was faster than convention recommended and slower than Eleanor's impatience demanded. But it was the number they arrived at through negotiation, Sebastian wanting to marry immediately, the Duchess wanting a full year of engagement for appearances, Eleanor suggesting 6 months as a compromise that nobody was entirely happy with, and that was therefore, she said, probably correct. The wedding was small. Lady Pembrook attended, wearing the most extraordinary hat Eleanor had ever seen, with the air of someone who has been vindicated. Cecily was there without Gerald, because Cecily had told Gerald that she was attending her sister's wedding whether he came or not, and Gerald had chosen not to, and Cecily had come anyway in a dress that was the color of happiness. Eleanor's aunt came. 2 of Sebastian's friends, who were quiet men of considered opinions, came and were entirely pleasant to everyone. The Duchess of Marath came and wore grey. Eleanor noticed this and found it, in some obscure way, deeply funny, and said at the wedding breakfast that Eleanor's arrangements for the flowers were unexpectedly charming, which was, from the Duchess, a very high compliment indeed. Eleanor wore green. Not blue, not grey, green, the color of growing things, because she was, she had decided, done with both the armor and the reach towards something she was afraid to claim. Green was just what she was, a woman who grew things and loved a difficult person and lived in her own life without apology. Sebastian, at the altar, looked at her in the way she had first seen at her aunt's dinner party, when she was 24 and he was 32 and the world was completely different, and also, in all the ways that mattered, exactly the same. Full attention, complete and unhurried. "You are wearing green," he said when she reached him. "I thought we had established," she said quietly, "that you notice my colors." "I notice everything about you," he said. "I have noticed everything about you for 9 years. I am simply now allowed to say so." The house Sebastian brought her to was in Northumberland, which Eleanor had not expected. She had assumed London, or his estate in Kent, and had been composing herself for London. But Northumberland was better. The estate was large and slightly wild, and had grounds that had not been properly managed in years, and a kitchen garden that made her actually put her hands over her mouth when she first saw it, not from distress, but from the sheer scale of the possibility. "It needs work," Sebastian said. "It needs everything," Eleanor said. She was already walking the beds, already calculating what was viable, what needed to go, where the sun would hit in March, and where it would be blocked by the old wall that needed a gate cut into it. "It is wonderful. You are looking at a neglected disaster and calling it wonderful." "I am looking at something with enormous potential," she said, turning to look at him, "and calling it what it is." He looked at her. "Yes," he said, "I know the feeling." She wrote to Lady Pembrook that autumn, as she had promised. Long letters, because Lady Pembrook deserved long letters, and because Eleanor, who had spent years with her interior life unexpressed, found that now that she was permitted to express it, she had quite a lot to say. She wrote about the garden, what she was doing with it, what she had learned about the Northumberland soil, which was different from the Ashford soil and required a different approach. She wrote about the house, which was large and full of old things that she was sorting through with the contained delight of a scholar encountering a new archive. She wrote about Sebastian's mother, with whom she was taking tea monthly in London, and who was, she wrote this carefully, not wanting to overstate, becoming slowly something that was not yet warmth but was approaching it, like a plant in early spring, not yet in flower but unmistakably, determinedly alive. She wrote about Sebastian. This was the part of the letter she labored over, because she was not a woman who expressed private feelings easily, and also because the feelings themselves were complicated, not in a painful way, but in the way of things that are real and have texture and do not resolve into simple statements. He was not easy. She had known he would not be. He was demanding and frequently impatient, and had strong views about things that she considered entirely trivial and contradictory views about things that she considered important. He had spent 41 years developing a self that did not naturally accommodate another person's presence, and the process of making room, really making room, not just the performance of it, was ongoing and sometimes difficult. Oh, but he was honest. That was the thing she could not get past and did not want to. He was honest with her in a way that nobody in 35 years had managed to be. He told her when he was frustrated. He told her when he was wrong. He told her things about himself that she suspected he had not told anyone, not because he was confessing, but because he was simply sharing. Because she was there and she was listening, and it turned out that a person who had been listened to improperly for 41 years has quite a lot to say when they find someone who listens correctly. She listened correctly. She had always known how to do that. She had simply never before had someone who listened in return. She wrote to Lady Pembrook, "I do not think I have changed. I think I have become more of what I already was, which is not the same thing. He does not require me to be smaller. I have spent 35 years being required to be smaller by convention and by courtesy and by the general management of other people's comfort. I had not understood until now what the accumulated weight of that was. I understand it now because I have put it down. You cannot know how heavy a thing is until you have set it somewhere and stepped back and looked at it." She wrote, "I am happy." That sounds like a small sentence for what I mean, but I have looked for a bigger one and I cannot find it. Happy is accurate. I will settle for accurate. In November, she found the letter. She was sorting through a box of old papers in the library, Sebastian's grandfather's correspondence, meticulously bundled, and she was cataloguing it because she was the only person in the household who found this enjoyable, when she found a letter that made her stop. It was dated 1823, written by a woman she did not recognize, to a man whose name was not Sebastian, but who was clearly Sebastian's grandfather. The letter was a love letter, not the flowery, conventional kind, but the kind that comes from a real person in a real moment. The writer was, from the letter's contents, a woman of no particular standing. A farmer's daughter, she said at one point, matter-of-factly, without apology, and she was writing to a young man who would become a duke. The letter said, "I know this cannot come to anything, and I would rather know it clearly than not know it at all. I am writing this so that you will know I loved you properly, not what I imagined you to be. What you are, which is considerable and strange and worth more than the world is offering you. I would have been a good match for your mind, if not your title. I hope, whoever you marry, you will find someone who matches your mind. I hope she argues with you. You need arguing with." He had not married her. He had married a duke's daughter correctly, as required. Eleanor sat with the letter for a long time. Then she went and found Sebastian. He was in his study, writing. Correspondence, the endless correspondence that came with the management of an estate and a title and a seat in the Lords. He looked up when she came in. He always looked up immediately when she came into a room. She had noticed this and was not yet used to it. The immediate looking as though she were the thing most worth attending to. She put the letter on his desk. He read it. He was quiet for a moment. Then, my grandfather? I think so. The date is right. He sat back. He looked at the letter and then at her. She sounds... Yes, Eleanor said. She sounds like... Yes, Eleanor said. He reached out and took her hand across the desk. She let him. We are not them, she said. We arrived differently. We arrived, he said. That is the important thing. She sat in the chair across from him. She looked out the window at the Northumberland sky, which was doing the dramatic thing northern skies did in November. Enormous clouds and sudden light, and the suggestion that the world was larger than you thought. She looked at his hand over hers. She looked at him reading the letter again with careful attention as he attended to everything. She thought about the woman who had written that letter. The farmer's daughter who had known clearly that she was not going to be chosen, and who had written anyway, not to beg or to manipulate, but simply to be known. To have said, to one person who mattered, here I am. This is who I am. I loved you properly. She thought about Eleanor Voss at 26, in grey dresses and silence, building a smaller and smaller life around the shape of what she could not have. She thought about what it had cost. The years, the narrowing, the becoming invisible. And then she thought about what it had led to, not as compensation. She was not sentimental enough to think that suffering accumulates into reward, but as a path, not the best path, not the one she would have chosen if she had been less afraid, but the one she had actually walked with the feet she actually had. And here was where it had brought her, Northumberland in November, a neglected garden with enormous potential. A man reading a letter from his grandfather's past with the full attention he gave everything, her hand in his. She had spent 35 years being told what she was worth, by the village, by Gerald, by convention and courtesy, and the thousand small daily diminishments of a society that had looked at her and found her wanting. She knew what she was worth now. She had always known, if she was honest. She had simply needed someone to stop running long enough for the knowing to be a shared thing. Sebastian, she said. He looked up. Your grandfather's study needs better light, she said. We should put a larger window in. He looked around the study, which was indeed dark. Structural work, he said. I know. Expensive. I know. You want it anyway. It should have been done 30 years ago, she said. We are only finishing what should already be finished. He looked at her for a moment with the expression she had first seen at her aunt's dinner table. That real, unperformed amusement at being given what he had not expected. Then he said, I will write to the architect. Good, she said. She went back to the library. She filed the letter carefully in the box, in its proper chronological place, with all the other old correspondence. Then she sat down at her own desk. She had a desk now in the library, a good oak one with proper light. And she opened her own correspondence and she began to write. Lady Pembrook died the following spring, at 74, in her yellow sitting room, with the cat on her lap and a book open in her hand and the satisfaction, her housekeeper reported, of someone who has arranged things to their liking. She left Eleanor a letter, not in her will, separately, delivered by her housekeeper on the day of her death, because Lady Pembrook had known exactly when she was going and had planned accordingly. The letter said, I have done a great many things in my life and been a great many things to a great many people, but I think the thing I am most pleased about, looking back, is you and Sebastian. Not because I arranged it. I did not arrange it, I only arranged the occasion. You arranged it yourselves, which is better. I am pleased because you are both people who deserve to be fully known, and you were in danger, both of you, of going your whole lives without it. I could not allow that. You will have a long life ahead of you, Eleanor. It will not always be easy. He is not easy, and you are not easy, and that is the best kind of life. Take care of your garden. Argue about things worth arguing about. Read the German texts. I am very glad you wore blue. Eleanor read the letter twice. Then she folded it carefully and put it in the desk drawer with the things she kept. Then she went out to the garden. It was April. The Northumberland spring was later than the Ashford spring. Everything up here was later, the ground harder and slower to warm. But it came eventually, as spring always does. The beds she had cleared and replanted were beginning to show green. The roses she had put in along the south wall were budding. The kitchen garden was in full first growth, lettuces and early peas and the mint that she had kept strictly contained, and the stubborn yellow rose she had transplanted from Ashford because she had liked its stubbornness and had decided it should have better circumstances. She was 36 now. She had been 36 for 3 months. Nobody had forgotten this birthday. Sebastian had arranged, quietly and entirely without fuss, for the morning of it to involve breakfast in the garden, which was something she had always wanted and never had, and the cook had made something elaborate, and Sebastian had given her a book she had mentioned wanting 18 months ago and had assumed he had not heard. He heard everything. She was still getting used to that. She heard him coming now, his step, which she could identify from several rooms away and from the length of the garden. He came out and stood beside her and looked at what she was looking at, which was the yellow rose, now budded, in its new and better location against the Northumberland stone. "It is going to flower," he said. "It always flowers," she said. "That is why I kept it. It was wrong and stubborn, and it flowered anyway." He looked at her. She looked at the rose. The April light was doing something generous to everything. The stone and the budding plants, and the man standing beside her who had finally stopped running after 9 years, and found that what he had been running from was not a danger, but a home. "We should plant more," he said, "along the east wall. It gets more sun." "I know," she said. "I have already ordered them." He almost smiled. "Of course you have." She took his hand. He held hers. Behind them, the house, their house, full of good books and old papers, and a study with still insufficient light, and rooms that were slowly becoming the rooms of people who lived in them rather than performed in them, stood in the April morning. Eleanor Voss, who had been branded a spinster at 35, who had spent 9 years in grey and silence and the careful management of a life too small for what she contained, stood in her garden in the Northumberland spring and looked at the things she had grown. Not just the roses, everything, all of it, her own. She was exactly who she had always been. She had not changed to deserve this. She had not become softer or more accommodating or less troublesome, or any of the things the world had implied she needed to become to be worth loving. She had simply been persistent. She had stayed herself stubbornly and sometimes at great cost, and she had waited, not passively but in the way of all growing things, putting down roots, turning toward light, continuing. The yellow rose, wrong and stubborn, was going to flower. So was she. So was everything.